I'm 18, standing in my family's kitchen, BBQ sauce still on my hands, when I hear my mom say they took my college fund, Grandpa's last gift to me, and handed it over for my brother Jackson's dream wedding. 20 grand for a barn and a party, while I'm told, loans are fine, Hadley, you'll figure it out. Hi, I'm Hadley, the girl who walked away that night, tears blurring the road, and built a life from scratch. Years later, they showed up at my door, broken begging, but I shut it, click, and sipped my coffee, free at last. Was I too harsh, or just done? That's my story. My parents chose my brother's wedding over my future, years later. Want to know how it all unraveled? Stick around and tell me in the comments, what would you have done if your family traded your dreams for someone else's big day? I'd love to hear your take. The air was thick that summer evening in 2015, the kind of sticky heat that makes you wish for a breeze that never comes. I was 17, sprawled across the porch swing at our little house in Raleigh, North Carolina, my legs dangling over the edge. The ceiling fan above spun in lazy circles, doing little more than stirring the humidity, while a pitcher of sweet tea sat on the table, beads of water dripping down its side like tiny tears. Beyond the screen door, fireflies blinked in the dusk, little sparks of magic I used to chase as a kid. Back then, I thought my parents saw me as more than just Jackson's shadow. Turns out, I was wrong. Riley, my best friend since 6th grade, sat cross-legged beside me, her freckled nose wrinkled as she flipped through a stack of college brochures I'd nabbed from the school counselor. The glossy pages of UNC shimmered under the porch light, promising dorm rooms and late-night study sessions. My ticket out. Think they'll have decent mac and cheese in the cafeteria? She teased, her voice cutting through the cicada's endless hum. I grinned, picturing us sneaking snacks into the library, free from this small-town life. Inside, though, the house buzzed with a different energy. My mom, Sienna, was in the kitchen, her knife slicing through a watermelon with the precision of a surgeon. The soft thwack echoed as she carved perfect triangles, arranging them on a plate for Jaxon. "That boy's got charm," she said, her smile stretching wide as the Carolina sky. I could hear the pride in her voice from out here, and it made me shift in my seat. Riley caught my eye, nudging me with her elbow, a smirk tugging at her lips. She knew how it was. Through the screen door, I saw my dad, Kieran, slumped in his recliner, a Bud Light sweating in his hand. The TV flickered with some game show he wasn't really watching, his nods more habit than interest as Sienna chattered on about Jackson's new job at the Ford dealership. He'd landed it last week, and you'd think he'd invented the car itself the way she carried on. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hand, and called out, "Hey, Dad, what's the deal with my college fund?" Grandpa had left it for me years ago, a promise whispered over his hospital bed that I'd clung to like a lifeline. Kieran barely glanced up, his grunt low and distracted. "It's there, Hadley," he said, eyes still on the screen. Sienna poked her head out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her voice syrupy but thin. "Enough to get you started, honey," she added, then turned back to her watermelon masterpiece. I frowned, the brochures suddenly heavy in my lap. Riley tilted her head, watching me, but didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The screen door creaked open then, and Jaxon strutted in, all 23 years of him radiating that cocky grin I'd seen 1,000 times. His dealership polo was wrinkled, like he'd just tossed it on, but it didn't matter. He carried himself like he owned the place. "Hey, y'all," he drawled, snagging a watermelon slice without asking. "Guess who's got a wedding to plan?" My stomach flipped, not from excitement, but from the way Sienna's face lit up, brighter than the fireflies outside. "Oh, baby, tell me," she said, practically bouncing as she set the plate down for him. He leaned against the counter, chewing loudly, and launched into it. His girlfriend's dream wedding, some big venue out near Cary, a guest list longer than a country mile. "She's got her heart set on it," he said, wiping juice from his chin. "Gonna be the talk of Raleigh." I stared at him, then at the brochures, my fingers tightening on the edges. Sienna clapped her hands together, beaming. "You deserve the best, Jaxon," she said, her words landing like a stone in my chest. I shifted on the swing, the chains creaking under me, and felt a twist in my gut, like I was the extra kid, the one who didn't quite fit the frame. Riley's smirk faded. She reached over, squeezing my arm, her silent way of saying she saw it too. Inside, Kieran tipped his beer back, nodding along to Jaxon's chatter, while Sienna started rattling off ideas. Flowers, catering, a band. I looked down at UNC's logo, bold and blue, and tried to imagine myself there, away from this. Life's funny, I thought, tracing the edge of the page. How some folks get the whole world handed to them, and others have to scrape for a corner of it. But that night, as the cicadas sang and the sweet tea grew warm, I didn't know how fragile Grandpa's promise really was, or how soon I'd find out. Spring had just settled over Raleigh in 2016, the air soft with that first flush of warmth after a long winter. I was 18, hunched over my laptop at the dining room table, the glow of UNC's acceptance letter lighting up the screen like a beacon. My heart thumped with a mix of nerves and hope. College was real now, not just a dream scribbled in the margins of my notebooks. The table was a mess of takeout from Smithfield's, BBQ ribs and coleslaw spilling out of styrofoam containers, the hickory smoke curling up to mingle with the faint scent of daffodils drooping in a vase from the farmer's market. I'd been too wrapped up in my own world to notice much else, but that night, something shifted. I was picking my dream school when I overheard them trading it for Jaxon's dream day. The clink of dishes from the kitchen pulled me out of my daze, Sienna's voice drifting through the doorway, low and hushed like she didn't want me to hear. I caught Kieran's muffled reply, a tired grunt over the scrape of a sponge, and at first I didn't think much of it, just another evening of their quiet routines. Then Sienna's words sharpened, slicing through my focus. Jaxon's fiancé wants that barn off Lake Wheeler, $20,000 just to book it, she whispered, her tone a mix of worry and resolve. I tilted my head, fingers hovering over the keyboard, the acceptance letter suddenly forgotten. Kieran sighed, long and heavy, the kind of sound he made when the bills piled up. "You handled the money, right?" he asked, his voice flat. There was a pause, a beat too long, and Sienna's answer came soft, almost casual. "Hadley can take loans, tons of kids do." My breath caught and my hands froze mid-type, BBQ sauce still sticky on my knuckles. Loans? What did that mean? Sienna's "you deserve the best" from last summer echoed in my head, but this time it twisted deeper, like a knife finding a fresh wound. I shoved my chair back, the legs scraping loud against the hardwood, and stormed into the kitchen, my pulse hammering in my ears. Sienna stood at the sink, suds dripping from her hands, her apron smudged with sauce. Kieran leaned against the counter, staring at his plate of half-eaten ribs like it held all the answers. "What about my college fund?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I meant it to be, BBQ sauce smearing onto my sleeve as I crossed my arms. Sienna turned, her face softening into that forced smile she used when I was little, and skinned my knee. Like a pat on the head could fix this. "Oh, honey," she said, stepping closer, patting my arm like I was still 5. "We had to shift it for Jaxon's wedding." Her words hung there, light as a feather but heavy as a brick. I blinked, waiting for her to laugh, to say it was a joke, but she just kept that smile, her hazel eyes darting to Kieran. He didn't look up, just pushed a piece of cornbread around his plate, his silence louder than any excuse. "Shift it," I repeated, my throat tightening. "You mean you took it?" Sienna wiped her hands on the apron, her smile faltering just a touch. "It's not like that, Hadley. Jaxon's fiancé. She's got her heart set on this big day and we couldn't let him down." She said it like it was the most natural thing, like borrowing a cup of sugar instead of rating my future. I stared at her, then at Kieran, willing him to say something, anything. He finally lifted his head, his gray eyes meeting mine for a split second before dropping again. "It's family money," he muttered, barely audible over the hum of the fridge. "We made a choice." My stomach dropped, a cold, hollow ache spreading through me. Family money? Grandpa's gift, my lifeline, was now a down payment on Jackson's party, some barn decked out with string lights and overpriced flowers. I stepped back, my sneakers squeaking on the linoleum, hands trembling as I gripped the counter. Sienna reached out, but I jerked away, her touch feeling like a lie. The kitchen blurred around me, the daffodils sagging, the ribs congealing in their sauce, the smoke stinging my eyes. I thought of Jaxon, oblivious somewhere, probably grinning over his fiancée's plans while I stood here, gutted. Folks don't always see the cost of their choices, I thought, the words bitter on my tongue. But sooner or later, someone pays. Sienna started talking again, something about loans and how I'd be fine, but I couldn't hear her over the roar in my head. I turned, stumbling back to the dining room, the UNC letter still glowing on my screen, mocking me now. I stood there, BBQ going cold on my fingers, wondering if they'd ever cared about me at all, or if I'd just been fooling myself all along. The weight of their words clung to me like damp air that spring evening in 2016, heavy and suffocating. I stood in our Raleigh living room, the TV flickering with a muted rerun of The Voice, its glow casting shadows across the worn carpet. Outside, cicadas screamed through the open window, a restless chorus that matched the storm brewing inside me. On the coffee table, a half-eaten pecan pie sat from Easter supper a few days back, its sticky sweetness now turning sour in my memory. I hadn't planned to walk out that night, not really, but staying felt like choking on their lies, each one piling up until I couldn't breathe. I gripped the edge of the dining table, my knuckles whitening, my voice trembling as I faced Sienna across the room. "You used my fund for Jackson's wedding?" I asked, the question spilling out raw and jagged. She stood near the couch, arms crossed, her apron still tied from supper, her lips pursed like she'd rehearsed this. "Loans are fine, Hadley," she said with a shrug, her tone light, like she was offering me a cookie instead of shattering my world. "You'll manage." Kieran slouched in his recliner, rubbing his temples with a weary hand, his Bud Light can empty on the side table. "Don't make a scene," he muttered, his voice gravelly, eyes fixed on the floor. Loans are normal. That's what they'd said in the kitchen, but it wasn't normal to me. Not when it was Grandpa's gift, not when it was mine. I shook my head, my breath hitching, the pecan pie's cloying scent mixing with the bitterness rising in my throat. Sienna stepped closer, her hands fluttering like she might smooth this over, but I held my ground, the table a shaky anchor. Then the front door creaked open, and Jaxon sauntered in, all 24 years of him wrapped in that smug grin I'd grown to resent. He was humming some tune, probably something from the radio at the dealership, his boots scuffing the hardwood. He didn't even glance my way at first, just headed for the pie, snagging a piece with his fingers. "You knew, didn't you?" I snapped, my voice cutting through his melody like a snapped string. He paused, mid-bite, then turned, that grin widening as pecan crumbs stuck to his chin. "Knew what?" he said, casual as a summer breeze. "That they took my college fund for your wedding?" His eyes flicked to Sienna, then back to me, and he chuckled. "Fiancé wanted the big day. Mom said you'd be cool with it." I laughed, sharp and hollow, the sound bouncing off the walls. Cool with it? The pie turned sour in my mouth, though I hadn't touched it since lunch. Jaxon leaned against the wall, chewing like this was all a game, while Sienna's smile tightened, her fingers twisting the apron strings. "It's his wedding, Hadley," Sienna tried, her voice rising a notch, defensive now. "One day that matters." She gestured toward Jaxon like he was a prize on display, her golden boy who could do no wrong. I spun on her, heat flooding my face. "And my whole life doesn't?" I fired back, my words cracking like a whip. The room went still, no answer, just the cicadas and the faint buzz of the TV. Kieran shifted, his hand dropping from his face, but he stayed silent, his jaw tight. Jaxon smirked, popping the last bite of pie into his mouth, oblivious or maybe just uncaring. Sienna opened her mouth, then closed it, her eyes darting away. That was it. The silence said everything. I spun around, grabbing my backpack from the couch, the straps biting into my palm. My keys jangled as I snatched them from the hook by the door, the sound loud in the quiet. "Hadley," Sienna started, but I didn't look back. I stormed out, the screen door slamming behind me, and slid into my beat-up Honda. The engine roared to life, tires screeching as I peeled out of the driveway, the pecan pie's aftertaste lingering like regret. Tears blurred the road ahead, streaking the streetlights into hazy lines as I gripped the wheel. The warm Raleigh night pressed in through the open window, but inside I felt cold, hollowed out by their shrugs and excuses. I'd spent years begging for their scraps, hoping they'd see me the way they saw Jaxon, but that was over now. Sometimes you've got to let go of what breaks you, I thought, the words settling like a quiet truth. Even if it's all you've known. I was done. Done waiting. Done pretending. As the houses faded into the dark, my chest loosened just a fraction, and through the sting, I felt it, a spark of something new. I drove on, no map, just that faint glimmer pulling me forward, away from them and into whatever came next. The road ahead had opened up that summer of 2017, a winding path I hadn't planned but took anyway, with nothing but a beat-up Honda and a stubborn streak to guide me. College was off the table now, UNC's glossy brochures long tossed in some dumpster back in Raleigh, but I'd found a future in coffee grounds and late-night hustle. I was 19, crashing on Riley's lumpy couch in her cramped apartment off Glenwood Avenue, the kind of place where the AC rattled and the fridge hummed louder than the TV. The scent of espresso steam from my dawn shifts at Bean and Leaf clung to my clothes, a badge of survival I wore with quiet pride. Sienna's voice still echoed sometimes. "Loans are fine, Hadley," but I was proving I didn't need their handouts or the guilt they'd tried to pin on me when I drove away. Those first months were a blur of sore feet and small victories. I'd stumble into Bean and Leaf before the sun peeked over Raleigh's skyline, tying on an apron as the espresso machine hissed to life. Wiping sticky tables, steaming oat milk for picky regulars, pocketing a few crumpled dollar tips. Every dime felt like a win, a brick in a wall I was building without them. Riley's laptop became my lifeline after hours, its screen glowing in the dim living room as I listed phone cases on Etsy, my fingers fumbling over descriptions. "Vintage floral," I'd type, or "retro stripes," watching $20 turn to $50 over weeks of trial and error. Riley would flop beside me, her curly hair spilling over the cushions, offering sleepy encouragement. "You're a natural, Had," she'd say, her grin wide as she handed me a glass of iced tea. I'd nod, too tired to argue, but her faith kept me going. Back home, I ignored the whispers, rumors about Sienna and Kieran that floated through mutual friends, but part of me wondered if they missed me at all. By 2018, the hustle started to pay off, slow but steady, like a garden finally taking root. I was still at Bean and Leaf, juggling shifts and shipping, fueled by iced coffee and Riley's pep talks over takeout. That fall, she dragged me to the NC State Fair, the air thick with the smell of fried pickles and cotton candy, the midway buzzing with laughter and blinking lights. We stood in line for a basket of those salty, greasy bites, my sneakers scuffing the dirt, when I caught a snatch of conversation from a woman behind us, someone from our old neighborhood. "Sienna's griping about credit card bills again," she said, her voice low but sharp. "They're stretched thin with that wedding coming up." I froze, a pickle halfway to my mouth, the tang bitter on my tongue. Riley raised an eyebrow, but I waved it off, forcing a laugh. Jackson's big day was still the sun they all orbited, even now. I turned back to the Ferris wheel, its lights spinning against the dusk, and pushed the thought away. My life was here, not there. A year later, in the summer of 2019, I signed the lease on a studio off Hillsborough Street, a cramped box with peeling paint and a window AC that buzzed like a swarm of bees. I was 21, standing in the empty space with a thrift store futon and a single lamp, my heart pounding as Riley hauled in a can of teal paint. "Let's make it yours," she said, popping the lid with a screwdriver, her hands soon streaked with color. We slapped paint on the walls, laughing as drips hit the floor, the room slowly turning into something mine, really mine. That night, I logged into Etsy, my hands shaking as I cashed a check for $10,000. 2 years of grit in a single number. I sank onto the futon, the check crinkling in my lap, sweet tea sweating on the floor beside me. A flicker of guilt brushed against me. Memories of Sienna's apron, Kieran's tired eyes, Jaxon's careless grin, but I shoved it down with a long sip, the cold washing it away. Hard work builds more than money, I thought, tracing the check's edges. It builds a life you don't have to borrow. I was climbing, steady and sure, but as I sat there in the quiet, those whispers about home, Sienna's bills, their stretch-thin world, made me wonder how far they'd fall and whether I'd care when they did. Fall had a way of sneaking up on Raleigh, the leaves turning gold and crisp, while the days stayed warm enough to fool you. By 2021, I'd carved out a life that felt solid, a far cry from the girl who'd peeled out of her parents' driveway 5 years back. Jaxon's big day, the one they'd all bet everything on, had crumbled faster than a sandcastle against a tide, and I wasn't the only one picking up pieces anymore. I was 23, settled into a one-bedroom apartment off Fayetteville Street, string lights twinkling along the walls like stars I'd strung up myself. A mason jar of sweet tea sat on the counter, the ice clinking as I sipped it. My custom tea business humming along, 6 figures in sight now, a number I'd never dared dream of back then. The Lake Wheeler barn, that shining symbol of their pride from years ago, had turned into an anchor, dragging them down while I kept climbing. That October, I leaned over my kitchen table, printing shipping labels for orders that stretched from California to Maine. The printer whirred, spitting out sheets I'd stack and pack, each one lifting a weight I hadn't realized I'd carried so long. The apartment smelled of ink and the faint citrus of the tea, a quiet rhythm to my days that felt like home. A year later, in the fall of 2022, Riley swung by with a greasy bag of BBQ ribs from Clyde Cooper's, her sneakers thudding on the hardwood as she kicked off her shoes. "You won't believe this," she said, plopping the bag on the counter, her eyes bright with gossip. She tore into the ribs, sauce smudging her fingers, and spilled it all. Jaxon's wife had bolted a year ago, barely 12 months after that overblown wedding, fed up with the debt it left behind. Kieran got laid off from the warehouse last spring, and Sienna's candle hustle, some half-baked idea she'd peddled at craft fairs, had fizzled out. I grabbed my phone, curiosity tugging at me, and scrolled Craigslist on a whim. There it was. Jaxon's F-150, listed for cheap, the ad muttering something about wedding bills. I set the phone down, the ribs untouched on my plate, a strange stillness settling over me. Riley nudged me. "You okay?" I nodded, forcing a smile, but the news sat there like a stone. By fall 2023, I was 25, unpacking a new printer in the same apartment, its sleek bulk a sign of how far I'd come. The string lights glowed softer now, casting a warm haze as I sliced open the box with a pair of scissors. A stack of old mail tumbled out from a shelf I'd shoved it under. Bills, junk, and then something else. An old photo, creased at the edges, slipped free. Us at the NC State Fair years back, me grinning with cotton candy, Jaxon hoisting a prize teddy bear, Sienna and Kieran beaming behind us. I paused, my thumb brushing the faded smiles, a pang hitting me, sharp, then dull. What had happened to that family? I tucked it into a drawer, the wood creaking as I shut it, and turned back to the printer. My phone buzzed on the counter, Riley's name lighting up the screen. Her text was short. Banks circling their house. Saw a notice on the porch. I stared at those words, the sweet tea forgotten beside me, my fingers curling around the edge of the counter. The barn, the truck, the candles, all their choices piling up like leaves in a storm. I leaned against the counter, the cool edge pressing into my palms, and let out a slow breath. Relief washed over me, clean and bright, like sunlight after rain, tinged, though, with a shadow of what-ifs. What if I'd stayed? What if they'd chosen me instead? I shook my head, the string lights flickering as a breeze slipped through the cracked window. Time has a way of showing who's carrying the load, I thought, my gaze drifting to the drawer where that photo lay buried, and who's just along for the ride. I'd built this, every label, every sale, without them, and that was enough. But then my phone lit up again, buzzing against the wood, and Sienna's name flashed across the screen after years of silence. I froze, my hand hovering over it, knowing exactly what was coming, and wondering if I was ready to hear it. Spring mornings in Raleigh had a gentle way of unfolding, the kind that made you pause and breathe a little deeper. It was 2024, and I was 26, standing on my balcony with a mug of coffee steaming in my hands, the city waking up below in a hum of distant traffic and birdsong. Dogwood petals drifted down from the tree outside, soft and white against the railing, catching the early light like confetti from some quiet celebration. I just settled into the stillness when my phone buzzed on the table behind me, Sienna's name flashing like a ghost from a life I'd left behind. Her voice broke over the line when I answered, cracked and fragile. But I'd built too much to let them tear it down again. Not now, not after everything. I leaned against the railing, twirling the mug between my fingers, the warmth seeping into my palms as she spoke. "Hadley, we're drowning," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "House payments, bills piling up. We need help." Her tone was desperate, a plea wrapped in panic, but I kept my voice steady, cool as the breeze ruffling the petals. "Why not loans?" I asked, tossing her old line back like a boomerang, sharp and deliberate. "They worked for me, didn't they?" There was a stumble on her end, a hitch in her breath, and then she fumbled, "Your family, Hadley." I scoffed, the sound harsh even to my own ears, and set the mug down with a soft clink. "Family?" I said, my gaze drifting to the dogwoods. Family didn't pick Jaxon's wedding over my future. She started to protest, her voice rising. "We raised you." But I cut her off, the years of hurt spilling out. "And I raised myself when you ditched me," I snapped, my fingers tightening on the railing. "You made your choice. Live with it." The line went quiet, her breathing ragged, and I hung up, the silence settling like dust after a storm. I picked up my coffee again, the steam curling up, and took a slow sip, letting the bitterness ground me. A week later, the knock came. Tentative at first, then harder, insistent. I stepped out from the kitchen, drying my hands on a towel, and peeked through the blinds. There they were, standing on my doorstep like shadows of who they'd been. Sienna with red-rimmed eyes, her graying hair pulled back in a messy bun, Kieran shuffling behind her, his shoulders hunched, hands stuffed in his pockets, and Jaxon, 31 now, glaring from the back, his dealership polo faded and wrinkled. I opened the door a crack, the spring air slipping in, and Sienna's voice trembled as she spoke. "Hadley, please," she said, her hands wringing together. "We're losing everything. The house, all of it." Kieran stared at the ground, mute as ever, while Jaxon's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. "We need you," he grunted, his voice rough with resentment like I owed him something after all this time. I looked at them, really looked, and saw the weight of their choices etched in every line, every slump. "Figure it out," I said, my tone flat, final. The door swung shut with a click, loud as thunder, the latch snapping into place, and I turned away, leaving them standing there in the fading light. Back on the balcony, I sank into a chair, the coffee still warm in my hands, and watched the dogwoods sway against the sky. The city buzzed below, alive and moving, while I sat still, free in a way I hadn't been before. Their faces lingered, Sienna's tears, Kieran's silence, Jaxon's glare, but I pushed them aside, sipping slowly, letting the moment stretch. A quiet doubt nagged at me, though, soft as a whisper. Had I been too harsh? I traced the mug's rim with my thumb, the steam fading now, and let out a long breath. You can't carry folks who won't walk themselves, I thought, the words settling like a truth I'd earned, but letting go still leaves a mark. I was done with their pleas, their excuses, but as the petals drifted down, I wondered if they'd ever see me, really see me, or if all they'd ever chase was the cash I wouldn't hand over. The coffee grew cold in my grip, and I stayed there watching spring unfold, the answer lost somewhere in the breeze. I stood there on my balcony that spring morning, the dogwood petals falling like gentle reminders of a life I'd left behind, my coffee cooling as I let their pleas fade into the Raleigh breeze, Sienna's tears, Kieran's silence, Jackson's glare. They'd chosen their path, and I'd found mine, stronger for it. In this life, we can't always fix what's broken, but we can build something new if we're brave enough to walk away, and maybe, just maybe, offer a hand if they ever choose to follow. I've learned that family isn't just about blood, it's about who sees you when the shadows fall. If this story stirs something in you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your own tales of letting go or holding on might just light someone else's way.